That night was supposed to be just another routine drive. I was driving down a dark road, already feeling a bit drowsy, but determined to get home. There wasn't much traffic, and the quiet of the road kept me on alert. Suddenly, I felt the car shake, followed by a dry pop. The tire had blown out. I pulled over to the side, worried about not taking too long. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck on that deserted road, but I couldn't ignore the issue. I got out of the car and started searching for the spare tire, already imagining I'd have to change it alone in the dark. While I tried to fix the situation, I noticed a car slowing down and stopping next to me. Two friendly-looking men rolled down their window and offered to help, which, at that moment, felt like a huge relief. They seemed well prepared, with various tools in their trunk, and assured me they could fix the problem in just a few minutes. I thanked them and accepted the help, trusting in the friendliness they were showing. But when we tried using the wrench to change the tire, it suddenly broke. They said they had another wrench at home, just nearby, and offered to take me there, suggesting I come along so I wouldn't be left alone on the road. Without thinking too much, I got into their car. At first, the atmosphere was still friendly. They even chatted about trivial things, as if we were old acquaintances. But as we got closer to their house, I started to notice a shift in the atmosphere. The place was remote, surrounded by trees, and the house looked in terrible condition, almost as if it had been abandoned for years. When we arrived, the men got out of the car, and that's when I realized something was wrong. Their friendly smiles had disappeared entirely. Instead, their expressions turned serious, almost cold, and a strange tension filled the air. One of the men pointed toward the entrance and told me to go inside. I tried to refuse, saying I'd rather wait outside, but one of them quickly pulled out a gun, making it clear I had no choice. The feeling of safety I'd felt before turned into paralyzing fear. Forced to enter the house, I looked around and realized I was in an actual trap. There were chains, broken chairs, and an overwhelming stench of mold. Before I could say anything, one of the men began explaining, almost mockingly, that my car's flat tire wasn't an accident. They scattered nails on that road to force drivers to stop so they could capture them. The revelation left me in shock. I felt completely vulnerable, as if I'd fallen into a perfect trap. My heart was pounding so fast I could barely breathe. I tried to stay calm, but the situation worsened as the men started talking about a ritual they performed once a year, always at 4 a.m, which required a human sacrifice. They discussed amongst themselves how they would go about it with me while I was there, trapped and powerless, hearing each word like a death sentence. The fear was so intense my legs felt weak, but I knew I needed to find a way out as soon as possible. They eventually settled in the living room as if they had all the time in the world. They drank and laughed, waiting for the ideal moment for the ritual. This gave me a glimmer of hope. They were way too relaxed, confident I had no way of escaping. I started observing my surroundings, looking for anything that could help me. That's when I noticed a slightly open window in one of the rooms. I didn't think twice. In a quick, quiet move, I managed to slip through the window, fighting to make as little noise as possible so as not to attract their attention. Once I was outside, I ran as fast as I could through the dark woods. Each step was a mix of fear and hope, and I just wanted to reach the road as quickly as possible. My breathing was ragged, and my whole body was trembling, but the fear of being caught again gave me the strength to keep going. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, I finally saw the road and a car approaching. Desperate, I waved it down, and luckily, 2 elderly men slowed down and stopped. I ran to their car, begging for help, trying to explain quickly what had happened while still looking back, afraid those men were coming after me. The elderly men saw my panicked state and quickly let me into their car. They started the engine, and we got out of there as fast as we could. I could only breathe a sigh of relief once I saw we were far away from that place. As soon as we reached town, I went straight to the police station. I reported everything to the police, every detail I could remember, and they assured me they would investigate. Later, I was informed that when the police arrived at the location, they found the house completely ransacked, but with no trace of the 2 men. They had fled in a hurry, leaving behind only the remnants of what could have been my end that night. You know that feeling that something is wrong before you even open the door? That's exactly how I felt that day. I came home exhausted after another long day at work, just wanting to relax. But as soon as I opened the door, I was met by a heavy silence, broken only by the faint sound of my son crying from the living room. My heart raced immediately, as if it knew before I did that something was terribly wrong. The house was a mess, like someone had been searching for something. Clothes, papers, even my son's toys were scattered across the floor. I called out for my husband, but only silence answered back. The scene felt like a nightmare, and I didn't even know what was coming next. I ran to my son, trying to calm him while my mind spun in every direction. He was visibly shaken, not understanding what had happened. I tried not to let my panic show, but it was hard. My husband always got home before me and stayed with our son until I arrived. So, where was he? Why would he leave our son alone, especially with the house in this state? I grabbed my phone and dialed his number, but there was no answer. I tried again, twice, 5 times, and still nothing. With each unanswered call, my despair grew. After several failed attempts to reach him, I started walking around the house, searching for any clue that could help me understand what had happened. It was hard to stay calm, and I kept taking deep breaths, trying to gather my thoughts. I looked through every room, opening drawers, and going through things I'd normally never touch. Somewhere in all this chaos, I needed to find a clue. The strangest part was that some areas of the house seemed like they'd been ransacked deliberately, as if someone was searching for something specific. That's when I noticed a wall in the living room that seemed different. It looked like someone had recently moved something there. I don't know where I found the courage, but I started to examine the wall more closely. When I pushed it slightly, part of it shifted, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside, I found something I could have never imagined. There was a stack of papers, detailed notes, and photos that looked like they belonged to a police file. At first, it didn't make any sense. They were just bits of information about people, places, and times. But as I flipped through them, a horrifying truth began to emerge. My husband was involved in crimes, and not just any crimes. My hands started to shake as I read through the notes, trying to digest what I was discovering. Everything pointed to a secret life he had been leading, something I could have never imagined. There were details about robberies, people involved, locations, and dates of meetings, almost like he was part of a criminal organization. This wasn't just a superficial involvement. It seemed like he had an active role, something significant within this group. I stood frozen for a few seconds, staring at those papers, feeling the ground fall out from under me. How could I not have seen this? How had he managed to hide all of this from me and our family? Slowly, the reality started to sink in. Maybe the house had been broken into by people who wanted something from him. Maybe they were enemies or rivals. At that moment, I realized the danger was far closer than I'd ever imagined. He had run, abandoning his own son there, alone, leaving us completely vulnerable. My heart was torn between fear and anger, a rage I had never felt before. I didn't know what to do. The only certainty I had was that I needed to protect my son and get out of there as fast as possible. Still processing everything, I went straight to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and started packing the basics for my son and me. My hands were still shaking, and I could barely think straight. Every noise I heard from outside sent chills through me, making me imagine that at any moment someone might come back to finish what they'd started. The idea that we were caught in the middle of a gang conflict and that my husband was part of one of them seemed too unreal, like a bad movie. But here, in my own house, with everything torn apart and those notes exposing his secret life, there was no denying what was happening. He had truly put our family in danger. When I finally managed to get out with my son, I rushed to the car and tried to call a trusted friend. I quickly explained what had happened and asked if we could stay with him for a while. Then, I took a moment to breathe and try to think. Minutes later, I received a message from an unknown number saying that my husband had turned himself in to the police. He had confessed to everything, apparently to ensure our safety. That just made everything feel even more absurd. The person I thought I knew so well was now a complete stranger, and he was only turning himself in because he had no other choice. The news that he'd surrendered to the police brought a momentary relief, but anger quickly took over. He left our house vulnerable, put us directly in the crosshairs of criminals, and only when he realized he had no other way out did he decide to protect his family. It was still hard to believe that the man I had shared my life with whom I had built a family, was capable of hiding something so dark. I felt betrayed, exposed, as if the world I knew had crumbled all at once. My son was still frightened, and I knew I needed to be strong for him, but my mind was a complete mess. The next day, I made the decision to move immediately. I went to the police station to handle some paperwork, and on impulse, I decided to visit my husband in prison. I needed to face him, to see with my own eyes the man who had destroyed our family. When we met, he looked like a stranger. There were no explanations that could undo what he had done. I told him our life together was over, and that I never wanted to see him again. He stayed silent, maybe knowing that any words would only make things worse. I left feeling a weight lifted, but also a deep pain for the family that would never be the same. I've always been curious about haunted places, but I never thought I'd have the courage to visit one. When I found out about the House of Seven Deaths, though, I was too intrigued to resist. The house, built in the 18th century, has a dark history of brutal murders. They say that in 1755, a priest and 3 other people were stabbed to death there. And years later, someone else was poisoned in the same place. After that, it became known as the House of Seven Deaths and turned into an attraction for people seeking paranormal experiences. I decided I had to see it for myself, despite all the warnings that no one left without having a story to tell. As soon as I stepped in, the air felt heavier, almost suffocating, and a sudden chill filled the space. It was an uncomfortable feeling, as if something or someone was watching me. The house was in ruins, with old furniture and worn walls, but every detail seemed to hold a dark secret. As I walked through the rooms, a shiver ran down my spine, and at times I caught glimpses of shadows moving at the edge of my vision. With every step, the silence felt even more oppressive, broken only by subtle sounds, like whispers I couldn't quite decipher. At one point, I reached a bedroom that, according to the guide, was where the priest and the others were found. The air there was colder, and it was nearly impossible to ignore the sense that something terrible had happened right there. I stood still for a few seconds, absorbing the heavy atmosphere, and that's when I heard footsteps coming from the hallway. I thought it was someone from the group, but when I looked, the hallway was empty. My instincts told me to leave, but curiosity kept me rooted in place, even as my heart raced faster with every second. As I tried to ignore the sound of the footsteps, which seemed to grow closer, I felt a cold touch on my shoulder. I quickly turned, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. My breathing was heavy, and my thoughts were tangled between fear and curiosity. Then I heard a faint whisper, almost like someone praying right next to me. My eyes widened, and I took a step back, feeling my throat dry and my body paralyzed. At that moment, a shadowy figure rushed past the doorway, so quickly that I could barely process it. It looked like the outline of a person, but something about it was strange, as if it didn't belong to this world. I was alone in the room, and everything in me screamed to get out as fast as possible. Yet my curiosity stubbornly held me there, wanting to understand what I had just seen. I took a few steps out of the room, trying to find some rational explanation, but everything seemed increasingly surreal. The house seemed to enclose me in a heavy atmosphere, as if it wanted me to feel the presence of every soul who had perished there. I made my way to the main room, where a few candles were still lit, casting a dim light over the space. As I looked around, I sensed the atmosphere grow quieter, and the air denser, like something was about to happen. That's when I heard a long, low sigh coming from behind me. I turned quickly, and once again, there was nothing there. It felt like the house was alive, as if every wall carried a piece of the suffering of those who had lost their lives so brutally. I no longer knew if what I was feeling was real or just my mind playing tricks on me. But one thing was certain. The fear growing inside me was impossible to ignore. I decided I had seen enough and started walking toward the exit, trying to stay calm. But as I went down the hallway again, I noticed that the area was strangely darker than before. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, mirroring my movements, a soft but unmistakable sound, like someone was trying to approach me without being noticed. Every step I took, the steps behind me matched, and my heart was pounding. I tried to speed up, but it felt as if the hallway stretched longer and longer, as if I would never reach the exit. Finally, I gathered the courage to glance over my shoulder and saw a pale, indistinct figure standing a few yards behind me, just watching me. I couldn't make out its face, but its presence was suffocating, as if it carried all the weight of the tragedies that had marked that place. I didn't know what to do. The figure remained still, unmoving, and it seemed that even though its face was indistinct, its eyes were locked on me. My body froze for a moment, and I felt a nearly piercing cold run up my spine. I tried to look away, focusing on the exit, but it was as if something in that presence held me there, forcing me to confront the dark past of that house. I took a deep breath and started walking again, trying to ignore the sound of the footsteps that now seemed closer and heavier. Each step echoed against the walls, amplifying the tension that had taken hold of every part of me. When I finally reached the door, I pushed it with all the strength I had left and practically ran outside. The air outside felt lighter, but I could still feel the house's presence, as if it were watching me until I was far enough away. I looked back one last time, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the pale figure in the window, as if it were saying goodbye or warning me never to return. Even now, recalling every detail, I can still feel the chill of that place. After leaving, I walked quietly through the nearby streets, trying to catch my breath and understand what I had just experienced. Even if I couldn't fully believe what I had seen, the sensations and sounds were still vivid in my mind. It was as if the house had shown me a glimpse of its dark history, as if I had felt firsthand a fraction of the terror that its victims experienced centuries ago. Every time I close my eyes, I can see the pale figure, the footsteps echoing behind me, and the whisper that seemed to carry all the pain of that place. That was no mere legend. It was a reality that still breathed within the walls of the House of Seven Deaths. Since that visit, I try not to dwell too much on what happened, but on some nights, in moments of complete silence, I can almost hear that same sigh and feel the presence of that figure behind me. It was an experience that changed my perception of the unexplainable and made me believe that certain places carry eternal scars, marks that never truly fade. The House of Seven Deaths continues to attract the curious, but honestly, I hope no one has to go through what I did. Perhaps the past of that place will never really disappear, and perhaps it never should.